Okay, welcome everybody. I want to do a quick video. This is a little trick that I came up with that I actually think works really well for when you're trying to come up with more interesting types of synth patterns. Let's say you're working on an intro, right? Or working on a track in general, and you have a little bit of a thing, but it needs like something on top of it, and you want to do some resampling or just some playing with effects and seeing what sounds cool because you don't really know where you want to head towards yet. Let's say I have this intro. So I have a little bit of an intro thing here, and it's very simple, but it plays a couple of bass notes right here, or they're not really bass notes, they're played with a synth, but they're implying a sort of like a progression in this whole thing. So we're in the key of D minor, and this is what I have. So it's really simple, almost nothing. We've got this, we've got a bit of a resonant noise background layer, some reverb kick and a regular kick. We got a hi-hat right here, just a very simple hi-hat, and we got some kind of a snappy kind of sound like that. And when everything is played together, it sounds like this. So you can hear there's sort of like an underlying progression underneath here, even though we don't have any chords yet. Now that progression follows these notes, right? So it's a progression going from D to A sharp and then to G. And that could be the bass notes of the chords that it is implying. It could also be the top notes of chords, but it doesn't really matter at this point. I think for this example, I've used it as the bass notes. So let's say you want to write something on top of that, right? So you want to create something on top of it, and you want to do some kind of a synth. So I already have something set up here. And this is a rack. Now I can open up the rack because it's very simple. You don't really have to look at any of this. I just made this rack to kind of quickly do some stuff like this in the future. So don't look at all these macros, just look at what we have here. Because in this rack, everything is now turned off except for this serum. Now if we have a look at the serum itself, just to quickly show what that serum sounds like. I'm gonna go in here, because you can see I have a whole bunch of notes, and let's just enable the bass notes, so the bottom notes, so we can hear what that serum sounds like. Right, so it's really just a very basic patch. If we go in here, disable all the effects, and then go into here, let's disable the filter, and disable that oscillator. Then what we have here basically is a saw wave with an envelope on it. So that's just creating that shape. There's a little bit of change happening on the levels as well, so that the low notes are a little bit louder than the high notes. You can see this graph, and I've set that to the levels of the oscillators in a backwards range, so a negative range. And that means that the low notes are at the louder level, and then the higher notes will be quieter. So as soon as I start introducing some higher notes, so let me just take these, for instance. So now if I play this, you can hear that the higher notes are quieter, right? Now this oscillator is completely mono. So I've added another oscillator where I removed the fundamental from the saw wave so that it's not clashing with the mono saw wave. So we have a really mono fundamental in the sound. So all the lowest harmonics, or the fundamental of all the notes, are going to be completely dead mono and are going to be there in mono as well. So when you sum it to mono, but then the higher harmonics of the sound have more width to it. So now we get this. So that's just the base of the sound. Then I have this filter, which has envelope 2 connected to it. So that creates that kind of a shape. And then I have two macros set up, and these are connected to the attack and the decay times of these two envelopes, so that I can, so basically I can just mess with them and increase the attack time or decrease the decay time, which helps to kind of change the sound a bit, especially if we're going to do more processing afterwards. So that's basically it for here. And then in the effects, some very basic stuff. Done a little bit of hyper dimension, just to create even more width. And then we have a multiband compressor, really bringing everything up. Bit of tube distortion. Then we have another low-pass filter, which I think is going to be, yeah, that one is also going to be controlled by this second envelope. So that brings back our more cleaner sound. It cleans it up again after the multiband compression and the distortion. And then we have a final reverb here that isn't really doing all that much. It adds a very subtle reverb, but it isn't really needed. I can literally just take this off and it should be fine, but I left it on, so whatever. We're actually adding another reverb afterwards, so don't really need this one. But that's it for the patch. Now you can see there's a whole lot of notes in here. And the trick here is that I basically started writing a pattern and trying to find a pattern that I really liked. So I started adding these notes as well. And I wasn't really too concerned about the pattern itself, because a lot of these notes are not going to be playing every single time, and that's where this whole thing comes in. So then we maybe enable these. Let's enable these ones as well. So that's kind of the pattern that I came up with initially. So that's those, and then let's do this one. Right, so I kind of started enabling notes like that, or basically just entering notes like that. And that was kind of the pattern that I came up with, this thing that I have enabled right now. That's basically what I started with. But then I started thinking, I want to create variations on this. And I don't want to have to, create a whole bunch of different versions with other MIDI notes. No, I just want to have one clip where I have all the notes in there that I might potentially want to hear. And then I want to sort of like take ones away from it. So I started adding more notes, and if I basically just enable everything, you can hear what I came up with. So I just started adding more notes that sound good with the other notes that are already there. And it gets really busy. This is way too busy. This is not how I would use it in a track. But this is where it becomes fun. So I decided, let me actually close this one down again. So that's the serum rack. I'm just going to close that down. I also added a filter and I mapped that to the same rack. So I have, where is it? Low pass filter down here. And then filter mod. I'm not sure why these are colored different. Let me fix that. That, and that. Then the randomizers, let's make those darker. And then the filter, let's make the filter this color. So that's the filter. That's the attack and decay. These are all mapped to a portal because I wanted to do some interesting resampling. So first things, I added a reverb. So this is just one of my presets from Valhalla Vintage Verb. Actually, no, it's just a default preset, just changed a little. And that really makes this sound a lot more interesting. Right, so now I can, for instance, if I select this one here, or let's just decrease the attack and decrease the decay. See, we can control that. Now, then I decided I wanted to add a rack to it with Portal to do some really interesting granular stuff. So I'm going to bring the attack time up a little bit again and the decay time up as well. And if I now enable this portal, you can see all these macros here are mapped to these macros right here. So inside of here is literally just a portal. And that portal is just one of the presets. I used this preset to start off from. I removed everything, all the modulation. I removed everything from the macros here. So all of that modulation was removed. I turned this stretch module off. I turned the gray delay off. I turned all the modulation from these mod 1 and mod 2 off as well. I went into the effects. I turned the effects off. And basically, the only thing that's still turned on here is the compressor on the master. And that's basically it. And then, of course, the grain controls of Portal itself. Those are still working. So I just went and mapped these controls to a rack inside Ableton so that I don't have to open Portal and I can just select this rack and then it automatically maps to my MIDI controller so I can just start twisting knobs on my controller. I think I'll upload this rack on my Patreon, by the way, because this is a really cool preset for resampling sounds. And I'll show you what it sounds like. So this is without. Right? And then we're going to add this one, which the only thing that's doing something is this section right here, the grain control section. That's the only thing that's actually doing something. Now that turns this into something much more interesting. Now it's already going to randomize because I've mapped a whole bunch of things to the rack. So all of these big knobs are mapped. So the offset, the density, the size, you can see that we've got density, size, pitch. So that is this one right here. We've got offset, that is that one right there. Then we've got shape, which is this one right there. The scale was set to octave so that it's going to stay in tune, but we're just going to get different octaves when we change the pitch knob right here. The count, I've also mapped to a macro knob, which basically just creates duplicates of the grain delay or grains that it plays. The panning, I've left that one alone, and that's basically what I've done here. But then, I've also mapped these little, do you see these little diamond squares? That's actually a control as well. That's the random function for this knob. And you can map those to a macro knob as well. So if I go into the portal here, you can see that I've got the density random and the grain random, and there's a pitch random as well right here. That's those little ones right there. So just click configure, it opens up portal, and just, let's say the panning, that one I haven't included yet. Let's say I want to map that to a macro. Just click and drag on that little square. It pops up right here, right down there. And you just do right click, map to macro. So you can map those random functions to the macro as well, which allows you to introduce randomizers, which will really do some cool stuff with resampling, and it will make it different every time it plays. But I want to create more random, because I added all of these notes, right? But I don't want to have all of those notes at all times. I just want to have some of those higher ones come in every once in a while, just to add some variation. I want to have a few of them, though, that are going to be playing always, like the bass notes. Those I want just to play every single time. And then these middle ones that form sort of like the main melody, those need to play a lot more often than the really high-pitched ones. So I went and created some more. I think it's this one. Yeah. So here I have two variations of the same pattern. One that has these notes, and then another one that has the extra high notes as well. And in there, you can see, let's just look at the one with all the notes. You can see here at the bottom, I have two lanes open. I've got velocity, and don't mind these velocity differences. I just did that so that I could easily select the top notes, easily select all the middle notes, and the bass notes are at its full velocity. But the patch has no velocity differences, so there's no velocity changes when I do that. What's a lot more important is this thing here at the bottom. So in Ableton Live 11, you've now got more options. So the top thing here, so right down there, we've got some buttons and the top one is basically your velocity, but beneath it, we've got chance. And what that will do is it will basically tell the notes where you bring the chance down, it will give that note a probability of how often it actually triggers. So if we set the probability or the chance to 50%, then it should only theoretically play that note 50% of the time. So by decreasing the chance on some of the higher notes, we can only make those come in every now and then. And by decreasing the chance on the middle notes, so I guess these ones, I've reduced those to, you can see what, well, let me actually show you here. So we have the bass notes. Bass notes, the chance is at the top, as you can see. So they play every single time because they have a chance of 100%. The middle notes have a chance of about 53%, so just a little above 50%. But then you can also see that I've added these two right here, so that corresponds to this note and that note. And those have a chance of 67% because I wanted those notes to be, well, to basically play a little bit more often than the other notes. And why I did that is because those two notes make up the key sort of like hook of the melody that is really recognizable. That interval change there on top of the bass note is really recognizable. So I wanted those notes to play more often. So I gave them a little bit of a higher chance. And then these top notes, so the ones that I gave the quietest velocity, even though the velocity doesn't really do much, those are the notes that are basically just there for spice. I want those to come in every now and then, but really not that often. So I added a chance of 26%-ish. So that means only a quarter of these notes should actually play. Now, it's not going to be exactly a quarter of the note because it's going to be random, right? Every time it hits one of those notes, then those notes have a chance of about 25% that it will actually trigger. And that now makes for a really interesting thing. Because if I now play these patterns, and you can see on this one, I've done the same thing, but I've just removed the really high notes. Because I wanted to have a version where we have no high notes at all, just those middle and the bass notes. So this is now set up for resampling. And I can resample this and get some nuts sounds out of it. So just to recap and just to show what it is doing now, this is without the granular. And you can hear what the probability is doing. So I'm going to turn the velocity off, so just the probability is visible at the bottom. And you'll be able to see that even though it comes by these notes, and you can also see if we zoom in on those notes, they have a little triangle icon that the bass notes don't have, as you can see here. And that indicates that they have a probability set to them. Now if I play this, you'll hear that not all of those top notes actually trigger. So already you might be able to hear that we were getting a bunch of different variations, and there were a couple of really interesting sounding variations as well. And then we have the version with all of the notes, and you'll hear that every now and then one of those really high notes comes in. See? And every time we let this loop, it's going to create different patterns. And that is the best part about this, because now if we start resampling that, the portal is going to create even more randomness with all the granular stuff that it does, and then combining that with a pattern that is already not the same every time that it loops, you're going to get some really cool stuff. So, I've created 2 audio tracks, and this is for a specific reason, because if I'm going to resample this, it might be smart to resample it in 2 different ways. One with the portal and one without the portal. Plus, and I'll share a little trick with you, I also want to resample this without the reverb. But while I'm tweaking the knobs, I want to hear the reverb, because I want to know what it sounds like with reverb. So I'm just going to create these audio tracks again, just to show you what it how you would do that. So first one, I wanna record the sound without the portal and without the reverb. So we're gonna go to Input, select track 12, and then here we're going to select one of these. So I'm going to go for portal, so the portal rack, and then pre-FX, which means it's going to choose that rack as where it's going to grab the audio from, but pre-effects, so before the effects, which means before the portal, because that's the one that's the first effect in that rack. So if I do this, and then arm this track, and let's solo it, and then click auto, then now we're gonna get basically everything coming out of here up until this point, so up until this autofilter. Everything after this autofilter is basically ditched. It's not included in the recording. So if I now play this, no reverb and no portal. So we can use that to resample that part of the sound. And then I can create another audio track. And then here we're gonna do track 12 again. I'm gonna choose the portal rack again, but this time I'm going to choose post effects, which means after the effects in the rack, which is only portal. So if I now do this and arm this track, then you should be able to hear that we're getting the same thing, but with portal on top of it, but no reverb. Oh, sorry, I need to set this to auto. So we can now basically have these two tracks armed, then I can solo the track with the portal on it, I can close all of these down, and I don't need to see the devices, I only need to see this rack with the macro controls, and as long as I have this rack selected, it automatically maps to my MIDI controller. Now I just click here, I don't even have to have it soloed, I can just do it with everything else in there as well, and just say, record. So yeah, that's basically it. It's really simple, and now we have this entire thing resampled, but without reverb. So if we go back in here, we've got everything without reverb, and we can just start cutting things out of it, and then we also have the very clean version without the portal. So if we now add the reverb back to these two tracks, it's gonna sound exactly the same as what it sounded like before. And we can just start using these parts to basically create a really interesting synth section for a track that is going to be so hard to recreate because, well, there's a lot of chance and probability involved, and also a lot of randomizers that change the sound in really interesting ways. So that's just a little trick, a little thing that I came up with. I actually really like this technique and it works really well, and I'm really curious to see what other effects I can include into this. I'm thinking like a grain delay or something like that, something crazy. But yeah, it's a really handy trick to just come up with, I guess, variations on a melody pattern that you really like. Just take a really basic pattern and just start thinking about what other notes work well with the notes that are in the pattern, and then just give those notes a lower probability than the notes that are more important, that are forming the actual hook, the actual melody. And then just start playing it and just let it run. Like, even if I don't tweak the settings on the portal, if I just find one setting that sounds good and just let it run for like 4 or 5 loops or something like that, or maybe even more, then you're already going to have a ton of variation to cut parts from and turn into a much more interesting section. So yeah, that's it. Hope you liked it, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.